My life is good, and it's a lot of fun. And sometimes, even doing all that fun, I can be surprised. And one of the things I was surprised was with the live on this subject, because as popular as I thought these ships would be, and by gum are they popular ships, I didn't expect the live to be quite so inundated as it was. So this is why this long patrol on this live is not going to be aimed at an hour, it's being aimed at 90 minutes. And I'm actually recording this while today, that's Friday 18th, long patrol, which is all about HMS Tiger, is still pending in terms of visibility because of processing on YouTube. In fact, it's been pending so long, I've got backups uploaded just in case they reject it. The joys of the internet. I love what I'm doing, and I love naval history. And I love doing YouTube naval history. And I love doing discussions like this. But it is a learning curve, still. And I'm very sure if the curve does that, I'm still down here. But when it comes to comparing sisters, well, that I'm slightly further along the curve. When we do a class analysis, it is always more complicated. It's always more of a dichotomy because you will have a curve of performance. And it seem to be quite interesting. You know, Queen Elizabeth class are a good example. Warspite seems to be everywhere doing everything. Queen Elizabeth comes a bit lower down that one. Then there's Malaya and Valiant, and finally Bombardier. That's the class. We can do something similar to the R-class battleships. We can do something similar with every class of battleship. That's more than one or two, more than two ships. With a one-ship class, well, it's either there or not. It either gets famous or it doesn't, or it's famous because it's Dreadnought. With two-ship class, they are seemingly identical. They are a pair of sisters. They have same combinations going into them. They are the same ship. But one always seems to be in the right place at the right time, and the other one doesn't. Always seems to be one gets famous, and the other one doesn't. Nelson and Rodney are a pair of shoes in so many respects. They are unique, really, because they are the only, and I say this with love, what I would call first-tier battleships of their period, which are designed in their form. And this is because, honestly, their form better suits a battlecruiser than it does a battleship. You see, a battlecruiser is designed around efficiency. And eventually that efficiency has to come down to the speed it can achieve, the range and radius of operation, which is why that particular form, where you have all the guns forward, so you only have to have one amount of insulation between those magazines that support those guns and the engine room, so you can have the maximum amount of space for engines and the maximum amount of space for ammunition and guns in the same hull, or the maximum efficiency going on, makes sense. But for a battleship, there are advantages. You can present a narrower profile while still be giving a full broadside. You can be more heavily armored. That is all true. And you can make better use of existing infrastructure. But if you can, you expand the infrastructure and you carry more guns and you, well, hopefully you have at least one turret to the rear. Why? Because a battleship is designed to be pounding. Let's be honest, A battlecruiser is designed to flit around. A battlecruiser is designed, as Repulse will do, to flit around, maneuver at high speed, and as Rodney does in various operations, to use its ability of maneuver and freedom maneuver to avoid getting hit, whilst dishing out a lot of punishment, as much as it can. A battleship, well, it's designed to shrug off punishment and keep going. That's why it has the framing, that's why it has the shaping it does have. And this has an impact on their design, and an impact on their development, and an impact on their structuring. But, and I say this with all love and respect for them, it's not the same. The Nelson and Rodney are a pair of beautiful sisters. Rodney, Repulse and Renown are a pair of beautiful sisters, and as many followers of the channel know, I am incredibly biased when it comes to HMS Renown. She is my favourite of all the battle cruisers the Royal Navy ever produced. Pre-World War I battle cruisers, it's HMS Tiger. But of all the Royal Navy battle cruisers that they ever produced, it's Renown. For me, it always goes Renown, Tiger, and Hood is quite a long way down the bottom. I think the Admiral class are great hulls, but I see Hood as an example of someone building more than they need to. If I'd wanted to build a better battlecruiser, I'd have put a triple turret version of Renown together. Make it slightly longer so it could take the greater beam without losing the efficiency. And that would have been it. Whoa, I've got 9 guns. 3 turrets. And a very high speed. I don't need to do as much as I need to do to build a battle cruiser. Yeah, I could fit more armor. But if I want to do that, then I've got what eventually becomes the G3 design, and then of course another design. There are options for that. But you don't need them. Renown is possibly Renown and Repulse when they're built, when they're upgraded, all these things, they are possibly the best pound-for-pound battle cruisers ever created in terms of value for what their value for money for what they can cause and they can affect and what they can do and what they do. As a rule, the Royal Navy produces pairs of ships under free circumstances. In fact, every Navy does this. They produce pairs when they're developing technologies, because that allows you to evaluate those technologies and minimize the impact of humans. I.e., if you produce a single ship and the humans muck up, it can make you think the technologies were bad because you don't get a report back. Whereas if you have 2 ships going out there and one set of humans muck up and the ship gets sunk, but you have the other ship come back, you then have an idea that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the ship which was at fault. It might have been the humans, i.e. the squidgy organic bit. When technology's moving at a pace, especially, 2 ships are a good combination and go for it. The other times they do it is when they want a fill-in class, because they are interiming between large classes and they are evolving the technology between them, but rather than they make it in one jump, they do a sort of half step, 2 couple of ships, check tech out, then bump up to the next class. Because they don't like to make 2 changes. Again, there is a radical conservatism which goes through naval design. It's very easy for people to pontificate, even for me to pontificate, and I know on things like the treble gun, about how you should jump into these things, how this is the best solution. But a navy is not just betting its money. A navy is not just betting its reputation. A navy is not just going, if it mucks up, it doesn't just have egg on its face. If a navy mucks up, its whole country could collapse. They can't afford, therefore, to make big mistakes. They can afford to make small mistakes. Small mistakes they can recover from. Big mistakes they can't. So they can't afford to put all their eggs in one basket and making a big mistake. This is why the Royal Navy goes with double turrets. The more I read about it, the more I see that, and I'm going to be sure this is probably going to show up once I get through the archives, but the more I read round the archive documents, and the archive documents I have, and some I didn't even realize I did have on the subject, the more I realize that triple turrets, which come in with Rodney, Nelson, have been around for a long time. But whilst it might seem riskier to go for a bigger gun in a double turret, the Royal Navy's always more worried about the turret mechanism than they are about the gun. Guns are complicated metallurgy, but very simple operationally. And worst comes to worst, you can take a barrel out and you can put in the older gun which works of the smaller size. A turret which is designed for the bigger gun can deal the smaller gun. But you muck up that turret mechanism, you're in trouble for a long, long time. Do I think they were right? No. None at all. Absolutely not one jot. But they are. That's what they do. But this also explains the R class, and explains Renown and Repulse. The Royal Navy cancels one R class. They also cancel HMS Agincourt, the 6th Queen Elizabeth, which I've done a whole video about, so please go look it up. And they do that because, frankly, the Royal Navy is looking at a war and looking at the realities of this war and thinking, we are in trouble. And the reality they are in trouble for? It's not that they're in trouble because they haven't got the ships. They're in trouble because of the infrastructure availability. It's great to say we want 8 and we won't wait, but it means a lot of ships being built. It means a lot of graving docks being full with new construction. And if you're thinking you're going to fight an early battle, because you have to remember, they were obsessed with this idea of an early battle. You can understand why someone might go, you know what we need to do? What we really need to do is clear out some of these graving docks, because we're going to need these docks in case of damage. The thing is, it wasn't the only option. And yes, it does lay the ground for what becomes Renown and Repulse. But it is not the only option by a long way. By a long, long way. Nope. There is another option they could have done with. And they did consider going this way, which would have been to build more floating dry docks and to build more graving docks. They were supposed to be building them anyway. Remember, the Royal Navy had plans for an infrastructure upgrade in 1916. They already had a lot of the ideas for how to do this worked out. They already were in consultation with a lot of yards for upgrading their graving docks, for upgrading their slipways and their launch points. It's one of those often interesting ideas put forward. What happens if they actually go ahead with it? What happens if they use the war and they say, oh, we need these facilities upgraded? And they get them upgraded. Government probably provide the money. personnel, well, would have been easier in 1914 than when mass conscription started. After mass conscription starts and they've got past the era of the PALS regiments and the volunteer regiments, that would have been a slightly better time sort of to actually get it done in 1914. What difference would that have had? Well, we'd have had more yards which could take HMS Hood, but honestly, my thinking is, well, you'd have seen all 8 of the R-class built. Possibly still have had Renown and Repulse built as battle cruisers, but doubtful. They'd have been built as battleships if they kept building them. Again, at the beginning of World War I, there isn't this worry about needing to build escorts, which would have done the Royal Navy out of 2 of the most gorgeous ships ever built. But they probably built other ships as battle cruisers, which means you'd get an earlier generation of battle cruisers built from the ground up as battle cruisers. So who knows what they would have looked like? Maybe maybe 3 or 4 members of the Admiral class. HMS Renown. She has a gorgeous and fulfilling career, which I got into in the live, but there's also a reason the live is 4 hours long and this is 90 minutes long. I'm not going to go through it. Renown's career is punctuated early on by service with the battlecruiser fleet. And then after that, after World War I, Royal Service. She does a lot of the royal yachting. And there's a reason for that. She is an elegant looking ship. At every point in her career, she is. And this is the same for her sister, really. They have an elegance about them. They have a status about them. Yes, they have 16, 15-inch guns, but is there really anything in the world which wants to take them on confidently, knowing that anything really in the world that can catch them, wanting to take them on confidently? They're sure they can probably win. Congos, etc., might well have a good chance of winning. Shanos and Eisenhower 2-1 should on paper. The only reason we say is because of the squidgy of organic bits in the middle, and maybe them deciding, oh no, Hitler will be so upset we scratch his ship, we have to flee and keep running away. In which case they keep running, and at no point does Renown stop firing. That's not on the ships, though. That's on the squidgy organic bits. This is a point that I sometimes have to make as a historian. Sometimes the critique is not of the ship. The ship could be on paper more than a match for another ship. But the squidgy organic bits are part of the ship as well, and they make a decision. And if the squidgy organic bits muck up, then that means the ship can get into trouble and go down. If I give another example, sometimes it's not even squidgy organic bits. Sometimes it's your AI in control of your ship on Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, which decides that it's going to run into torpedoes repeatedly. Just to be annoying. But there's nothing wrong with that. That's life, and that's part of a ship, and that's something you have to consider, but ultimately there's nothing wrong with that. Ships are special though, and it's the sisters that we can use to evaluate this. And with Renown and Repulse, what we can do is we can evaluate their careers and consider them. Renown starts off in many ways as the less warlike sister. Repulse is the flagship. Repulse is the ship which does the global tour with Hood, showing off the Royal Navy as a mean, lean, fighting, or rather economically starving machine. And that's its purpose. You know, they cruise around the world with the D-class light cruisers going, hello, look at us. Do you want us in your backyard? Do you? It might be a D-class cruiser that's doing the surface raiding in your area. It might not. It might be a D-class cruiser doing the surface raiding in your area, and you go off to hunt it, and you suddenly find that sitting in your area is also HMS Repulse to go, hello, I have 15-inch guns. Would you like to play? It's about how you use the ships. If an 8-inch cruiser comes out to fight one of these, there ain't going to be much less of the 8-inch cruiser. Yes, it can probably cause damage. But if it's a solo 8-inch cruiser, how much damage is it going to cause? And the very thing that works against the Germans as surface raiders, i.e., where do they go and repair? Where do they go and get fixed? Isn't the same problem the Royal Navy faced. The Royal Navy faces the thing of they have the infrastructure around the world. They really do. But the question is, can the ships they have use that infrastructure? Do they have to upgrade that infrastructure? Or do they have to build the ships accordingly? And that's what leads, of course, to Rodney and Nelson, because they are designed to make the most efficient use possible of the infrastructure available, and to carry the most armor possible. There is certainly an argument if you had reduced the armor and put in a third shaft and given them slightly more power, you could have had the first fast battleships. You could have achieved that with them. Life happens. Life happens. There's an interesting question, though, that comes up, and it's something when we talk about fast battleships we should really think about. Repulse and Renown are battle cruisers. But you have to remember they are battle cruisers evolved directly from R-class battleships, with some components coming straight from the battleships, and still in battleship form. And especially this goes for some of their framing, which is why they are able to be up-armored quite so easily without the limitations, and they have battleship-grade armor from the Admiralty Cochrane attached post-war and tapering, etc. This armor is not as thick as is put on Hood. Maybe, in terms of belt. But I would often say that I think, again, Renown and Repulse are actually better protected. Pound for pound, and in terms of design and framing and Hood is. Why? Because Hood really is a battle cruiser. Hood is the ultimate battle cruiser. It's not a fast battleship. Its framing, everything shows you it's not a fast battleship. It is a battle cruiser. But if you're looking for a real stepping stone between battleship and between battle cruiser and fast battleship, you need to look at this generation, because they quite literally are in many ways a fast battleship, because they've taken a battleship design, deleted a turret, added more horsepower, and lengthened. And yes, the Royal Navy done that on most of its previous battle cruisers. It had done something similar to that with the existing design of battleship, of dreadnought battleship. But With Renown and Repulse, they really pushed it. In fact, you can almost argue that their framing density and the way the framing is allocated is heading up to the heavy level for a battle cruiser. It's not quite at the fast battleship level, it's definitely nowhere near the battleship level. But the way you would judge it is by the amount of frames, its length divided by number of frames. So it's overall length divided by number of frames. So you get a sort of frames per meter. And that can be a very interesting statistic to analyze ship designs. Now, I'm not going to get into that today because I have an idea for a future video where I will do a long patrol on frames per meter on ships. And it'll be a special which will come out when I'm traveling at some point, probably. And look through the different types of ships and talk you through the designs and the number of and their framing level and what they are. That is something to worthwhile thinking about when looking at ships, because a ship is not just this. It's not just what you see on the outside. It's far more about what's on the inside. On the outside, it can look like a battleship. Let's be honest. Hood. Pair of turrets each end. Yes, you look like an R-class and a Queen Elizabeth-class battleship. You have the same amount of guns. There we go, you must be a fast battleship because you're a fast ship. Look inside. Oh. 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 And actually, the interesting thing is battlecruisers often become more expensive, more difficult because of the framing differential between them and battleships. It's a way of cutting down weight and giving more compartment space, but that also tends to have an effect on how you balance a bit large, heavy objects in the hull, i.e. turrets and engines, because framing supports those things. So, and armor. All these things, framing comes into that. Difference between ignominy and infamy, though, with the R-class battlecruisers. Renown gets forgotten. I know she doesn't get forgotten on this channel, and she certainly doesn't get forgotten on Dragon Naval's channel, and a fair other channels, but if you go and talk to most of the public, and you ask them about Renown in World War II, they'll look at you and go, huh? It's kind of like if you ask them about HMS Nelson in World War II, they're looking at, huh? Quite more than a few know about HMS Rodney, but I think that's due to the Sink the Bismarck movie. I really do think the Sink the Bismarck movie is responsible for that one. As for Repulse, well, if they know about her, it'll be 4C. They know about her getting sunk. They don't know about her war service. They don't know about her cruise around the world in the 1920s. They don't know about her taking Prince of Wales to Africa. They don't know about any of the things she gets up to. What they know about is she got sunk. They don't even know how often. That she kept dodging and flicking and maneuvering, and she managed to dodge so many attacks. And in the end, it's a combination of overwhelmed numbers and luck on the part of the enemy, as well as bad luck on the part of her. And honestly, it can come down to luck. Let's be honest, aerial torpedoes are not the greatest weapons in the world to attack a ship with. Attack ships with. No, they're not. They will make it. They are a good weapon in that if they hit, they make a big hole in the bottom, which lets water in. And let's be honest, letting water in is a major problem. The fear of letting water in is why one of the things that the Washington Naval Treaty allows is for ships to be upgraded in terms of protection against air attack and submarine attack. And this is in 1920. I know, people going, oh, but they didn't realise people either use that as a thing of they realised the future of air was air power, or but they didn't realise the viability of air power at the time. Honestly, everyone knew air power had potential. They didn't know how long it would take to reach that potential. It's one of those things. If you have a few inventions, well, it could have reached it in 5 minutes. But if you don't have those inventions, it could take 5 decades. It's power density. It's the same as with ships at this point. It all comes down to that power density. How much power can you get? How much horsepower per ton you can get from a design? And it matters. The Washington Naval Treaty is, of course, what defines Nelson and Rodney, because it puts in limits. Yes, Britain is trying to maximize the available infrastructure because it hasn't on the 1916 upgrades, but also there is a little thing. The British Empire may, in accordance with replacement table in Chapter 2, Part 3, construct 2 new capital ships not exceeding 35,000 tons, standard displacement each. On the completion of the said 2 ships, the Thunderer, King George V, Ajax the Centurion, shall be disposed of as prescribed in Chapter 2, Part 2. There's also, no capital ship of any contracting power shall carry a gun with caliber in excess of 16 inches. Now, here is the point. I often get asked by people, why do all the cruisers end up with 6-inch and 8-inch guns? Because those are the limits of the categories. And it's all the same with battleships. The moment you say the limit is 16 inches, everyone's going to be building 16 inches. Because no one would be the one with the smaller. Insert word of choice there. At the table. None of the politicians want it. They all want to have the big one. Or at least as big as they can have. So there you go. That's why 16-inch battleships suddenly become important. Imagine if they'd said 15-inch. The Americans would have had to take all their guns down. So would the Japanese. Imagine if HMS Renown existed. They'd have had to make it 18-inch, or they'd had to tell the Royal Navy to get rid of it, in which case the Royal Navy would have gone, no. Because, again, if Renown had been built, and she had 18-inch guns, as I often put forward, then the idea that the next generation of ships would not have had 18-inch guns is completely insane. So Hood would probably have had 18-inch guns, in which case the Royal Navy would have had 2 ships with 18-inch guns, and would have been going, how about no? If anyone tried to get them to get rid of them. So everyone would have wanted to build up to 18-inch guns. Which would have also meant completely everything else with less than 18, probably less than 15-inch guns would have been completely irrelevant and might as well be got rid of quite quickly. And that can be argued to be what the Royal Navy's planning to get rid of. They're getting rid of a load of 13.5-inch battleships in return for 2 new ships. Why are they going to be battleships? Because they're replacing battleships. This is the point. People go, oh, they did it because the Royal Navy signed up to get capital ships. No, they did it because the cost of getting those 2 new ships was 4 battleships. The American cost for their new ships was 2 battleships. The Royal Navy's cost for 2 new ships was 4 battleships. Or put another way, they were losing 32 guns and getting 18 in replacement. That doesn't sound that good a deal, does it? Yes, they're more powerful. Yes, they're going to be more capable ships. But also, they're going to have to work with this as a battle line. It's a battle line which still includes HMS Tiger in the battle cruisers, which is quite good because Tiger's a cute ship. But it's a battle line which is also going to include things like the Emperor of India, Bembo, Iron Duke, Marlborough. Those are some powerful names. I wonder if the Royal Navy considered what happens if we offer to get rid of all 8 13.5-inch ships. How many 16-inch ships will be allowed to get? Up to 35,000 tons. Could they have got 5? They would have been giving up, well, let's be honest, they would have been giving up 191,500 tons of shipping from their 580,000. So with a top limit of 525, I could probably use it to get at least 4 Rodney and Nelson. But no one wanted the Royal Navy to get 4 brand new battleships, least of all the US, because that would have been scary. Would have been lovely, but would have been scary. And besides, the Royal Navy already had a Hood, which was the largest capital ship in the world at 41,000 tons. It was considerably larger than the 35,000 ton limit. But again, the Royal Navy wasn't giving it up. So this is the kind of horse trading going on. Would it have been better for the Royal Navy to get rid of those ships? Arguably, yes. It would have given them 4 new ships to build in the 1920s, keep industry going, along with some refits and repairs of the R's and the Queens, which could have meant a better navy, better industry available for when they needed to do the construction in the late 1930s. There's also a chance that with 4 more ships, well, the problem is when you have 2 ships, and this is something which has to be considered. You have 1 ship, you have a white elephant. You do. You have that capability occasionally when that ship's available and fully worked up. Otherwise, you don't. If you have 2 ships, you usually have that capability available. But that's in peacetime and as long as no accidents happen. If you have 3 ships, you always have that capability available. Even if there is even if there's accidents, you can still have the capability available. If you have 4 ships, you have that capability at sea available, on call the whole time. This is why nuclear deterrent. 4 ships. 4 boats. 5. This usually means you can have 1 at sea and up to 2 on call available. So you have a significant capability available whilst refit, repair. Probably one of these 2 is training up, but fairly well trained up, especially because you've got enough personnel experience to move across these 5. 6, you then have 2 at sea, usually 2 at sea, 2 in training repair, and 2 in various stages of refit. The more ships you have, the more efficient the system gets, because the larger the pool of personnel you have you can call from who are experienced. The larger the pool of you generate of experienced personnel, the more efficient your ships are, the better ships are prepared for operations. Everything has a knock-on case. Which is why we normally like a class of greater than 2 ships. As you can see, all the details from these ships had to be given off in advance. But the important thing is the definitions of capital ships and definitions of standard displacement. Capital ships, in the case of a ship thereafter built, is defined as a vessel of war, not an aircraft carrier, whose displacement exceeds 10,000 tons. Standard displacement, or which carries a gun of a caliber exceeding 8 inches. Ouch, if anyone wants 9.2-inch guns. Standard displacement. The standard displacement of a ship is the displacement of the ship complete, fully manned, engined, and equipped, ready for sea, including all armament and ammunition, equipment, outfit, provisions, and fresh water for the crew. Miscellaneous stores and implements of every description that are intended to be carried in war, without fuel or reserve feed water on board. The word ton in present treaty, except in the expression of metric tons, shall be understood to mean the ton of 2,240 pounds. That's 1,016 kilograms. Vessels now completed shall retain their present ratings of displacement tonnage in accordance with their national system of measurement. However, a power expressing displacement in metric tons shall be considered for the application of the present treaty as owning only the equivalent displacement in tons of 202,240 pounds. A vessel completed hereafter shall be rated as displacement tonnage when in the standard condition defined herein. Cute. But a limiting factor, and a factor in what design that was chosen. Again, the G3s, the M3s, they'd been chosen in the shape they had been because the Royal Navy had been thinking purely of infrastructure. When it comes to the Nelson and Rodney, they're thinking about this, the tonnage limitations. They're thinking about what are they going to be able to do with those ships? What capabilities can they provide? And what capabilities do they need from them? But they're also thinking they're going to have a problem. These ships are going to be destined for the home fleet. They're never going to be to the Mediterranean fleet, and they're never, ever going to go out far east. Why? Because in order of priority and security for Britain, there is home waters. If someone causes trouble there, Britain itself is in trouble. Then the Mediterranean, because that's our access and deployable route to the Far East. And then the Far East, which is the jewels of the Empire. They need all three safe. If they'd had 3 of these vessels, you can guarantee one of them would have been sitting in the Mediterranean. If you had 4, probably a pair of them would be in the Mediterranean and a pair in the home fleet. But they only have 2, so they stay in the home fleet, or Atlantic fleet. There's also the fact that if they had 4, they'd have probably gone for slightly less armor and slightly higher speed. Again, when you only have 2 ships, they are very precious. They become Fabergé eggs. You have to take care of them. You have to carefully nurture them, gentle them, protect them, because they're your 2 ships. If anything happens to one, you're down to 1, in which case it's not a capability anymore, it's a white elephant. These are Britain's only 16-inch armed battleships, which is the big guns you're allowed. It's not right, but it's what they had, and it's what they could do, because it's what they were allowed, because of treaty. And there are people who rightly quip at this point usually, well, they could have just rewritten the treaty. Well, the trouble is they'd had to get everyone on side. Honestly, I would love the Royal Navy to have got 4 of these ships. I think, honestly, though, if they got 4 of these ships, they would have been slightly different. As I said, not astronomical speeds, but probably they would have been given the horsepower to get them up to 25, 26 knots. They'd have probably been Queen Elizabeth class fast. In which case, they'd have been far more useful, but also they'd have been far more scary, because if they could normally get up to that speed, who knows what Darrell Hamilton would have got them up to. As I explained it, there is... Every navy has characters, and those characters achieve things which others just, no matter how they try, don't seem to manage to. If you've got Admiral Lee, Ching Lee of the US Navy with you, well, that ship is going to have very good gunfire. If you have Darrell Hamilton of the Royal Navy with you, that ship is going to go fast. And he's going to find every way he can to make that ship as fast as he can get it to go. And that becomes a problem for people, because the whole security of everyone when facing these is they're not supposed to go fast. It's kind of like the big guy in your rugby team or your American football team or your Aussie football team. They're supposed to be the big heavy anchor of your scrum, of your defensive line of your offensive line. They're supposed to bash a hole, and then they're not they don't keep up with the wingers on the place of rugby, or I'm trying to remember American football from the days when I played it. It's always good at better at ice hockey. Running back, I think. Is it running back? The very fast one, anyway. Not the quarterback, because they chuck the ball, but the one who gets the ball, running back, I think. The point is, though, if you have a big player who turns out to be even moderately fast, that causes trouble. Shaq in basketball, very big, very intimidating, and very fast. HMS Nelson had a good career. She is always the flagship, though, up until King George V comes into service, in which case King George V becomes the flagship. So she's the flagship of the Atlantic Fleet or the Home Fleet. She's always doing prestigious duties back at home. She does do war service. She does have a good career in war service, but it's not the same. Almost because of her name, the expectations of her are so high. So anything she does becomes sort of like, well, of course she did. She's HMS Nelson. Look who she's named for. Nelson is just that famous that she is outshone by her own name. That she's a gorgeous ship. A very capable ship. And I always love their stern. I think it's such a nice curve. I know there are people who turn around and go, right, we should stick a gun on the back, and I have done that in UAD and various other things. But I think, honestly, the only things I would really change about this design, if I was in charge, if I was the DNC and I was the one designing and putting forward to the Admiralty, switch B and C turret around in terms of their elevation. So C can fire over B and A, and B behind A, so that can fire at a B can fire over A. So all 9 guns can fire forward. At nearly maximum elevation, at least for B. And slightly lengthen the hull while doing that, so I can incorporate A, the gun arrangement, but B, more engines and a second funnel. Whole purpose being put in a third shaft. And I don't care how much I'd have to have lied to the Washington Treaty Committee about it. I'd have got it through. Maybe fitted for, not with armor. And then have deck armor plates, which slot down on top of the deck. You have all this lovely wooden paneling here. Yes, we do. It's a lovely wooden teak deck. Moment war comes out. Ah, yes, we take the teak out, and we've got these metal cutout plates which just go down, pum pum pum, on the deck, and then we tar them in. Now they're all cemented into place. And oh, look, they're now riding naturally. They've always been riding slightly higher, these ships. Yes. Anyway, HMS Rodney. Now, she has an advantage. Rodney's name is just about famous enough she's going to get noticed, but not so famous that it's going to overshadow her at this point. And Rodney has the luck. She's the ship which visits Norway every time she's taking over flagship duties for her sister. She's the ship which is in the right place. Nelson is straining to get to Bismarck. Rodney gets Rodney's there. Rodney is the ship which scares off Gneisenau. Because basically Darrell Hamilton is sitting there going, more speed! He's the 1940s version of Jeremy Clarkson going, power! I will have all the speed! Honestly, she is lucky because she's in the right place at the right time. She almost wrecks herself fighting Bismarck. I mean, literally, her guns do more damage to her than Bismarck's guns do. Because they buckle up the deck so much. Again, those armor plates in the deck. Such a good idea. Don't know why I didn't think of it earlier. And she does so much. Sometimes a ship will capture the public imagination. HMS Cossack does at the Altmark incident. Is Cossack the only ship there? No. There's all sorts of others involved. But she's the one who goes in, she's the one who rescues the people, so she's the one that's remembered. And then Narvik happens, and a few other things happen, and Cossack's name is cemented with the British public. So, despite the fact that it's Nubian, Tartar, Eskimo, and Asante, which survive World War II, if you ask anyone in the street if they know of a tribal class destroyer from World War II, if they actually know of any of them, they'll probably say Cossack to you, because that's somehow stuck into the national landscape. Rodney is like that. She has some early successes, some early operations which do really well. And she keeps on building from strength to strength. Every time she does involved in another operation, that gets pushed out. Yes, there's a propaganda effect going on. Yes, there are all these things being pushed in to try and fight the morale battle with the public. And you have to remember, the morale is to numbers as is 7 to 1. Or rather, if you have to pick between having a smaller, highly motivated force or a massive, barely lethargic force which doesn't really want to be there, always go with a smaller, highly motivated force. The morale battle is part of a world war, and Rodney was captured up by it. But honestly, what is more interesting is the number of operations where they do manage to get both of these ships together for them, because that shows you how important that operation is. If an operation has Nelson and Rodney along to it, it basically says this is the most important operation the Royal Navy has going. Because there is nothing more powerful than them in the Royal Navy's arsenal. Ship for ship, there is nothing more powerful. We can argue about aircraft carriers, and certainly the multi-class have been built, their air group would have been far more powerful. And Indefatigable and all those sort of the larger armored fleet, larger fleet carriers, would have been viable. Ark Royal. But the fact is, when both Nelson and Rodney show up, that's the Royal Navy putting their two most powerful eggs in the same basket. Because if you want to guarantee if Tirpitz comes out, she gets sunk, you have Nelson or Rodney there. Because there is no way Tirpitz is surviving that one. If you want to guarantee, you're going to say, if you're facing a Vittorio Veneto, or Roma, and you want to guarantee your chance of being able to fight them off, you want these there. Yes, they're not going to be fast enough to catch those ships. But if those ships are coming to them because they want to take out the convoys, well, these are two very big obstacles they're going to have to get through. And they're not going to like having to go through them. Because there won't be much of them left after they go to do. Because again, these are 16-inch gun battleships. And everything has been put into making them as accurate and as powerful as possible. It's kind of like Repulse and Renown. Repulse hasn't had the upgrade, but by God does she get the tech. The same as Renown does, and Nelson and Rodney. You have technology going around, i.e. radars or upgraded sensors or anything. It goes on those 4 ships. Which is why it's good to compare the 2 sets of sisters, because the 2 sets of sisters are very similar in that regard. These ships are special to the Royal Navy. They matter to the Royal Navy. They're highly capable capital assets. The only problem for the Royal Navy is it has so few. Would it have been worth it to sacrifice Tiger as well? So instead of 191,500 tons, to sacrifice 200 and, well, that's going to be 8,500 tons onto that, so that's going to 220,000 tons. Of that, that's down to 360,000 tons. And yeah, they could get 5 Rodney and Nelsons. Would that be worth it? It might have been. If the Royal Navy could have got it free, it might have been. They wouldn't have been the Nell rods we see. As said, those would have been Nelson and Rodney, but they would have been modified. If you're replacing 8 battleships and a battlecruiser, you're going to want fast battleships. Plus, it would up the pace of the line. You'd be getting rid of all your slower ships in the battle line. Yes, you've still got the R-class battleships. But even by this point, they're considered second rate in terms of speed. So yes, you'd go for 5 ships, probably with a similar speed profile, if not a slightly higher speed profile, than Queen Elizabeth class. So 25 knots, 25, 26 knots. Not much more power, not much more effort to put into it. Could probably have got this design based on it up to it. That'd be an interesting world, where the Royal Navy sacrifices all its 13.5-inch gunships to get as many 16-inch gunships as it can. That would also give the Royal Navy arguably the most powerful and certainly the most modern battle line of any navy in the world. Would the Americans and Japanese have wanted to complete a similar number of new ships? They probably would have done. Unlike the Royal Navy, though, which would have cleared its decks of admirals, etc., and all the other things, they'd have had to probably complete existing designs on the treaty orders that fit within the treaty parameters, of course, whereas the Royal Navy would have built new ships. Nelson, Rodney, Anson, Howe, Vanguard? Possibly. Possibly they go with another admiral's name. Possibly Duncan, considering Duncan is the when looking for considering ships named after admirals, Duncan is the one which has come up most recently today, as is D class of Type 45. Ships matter. The stories of sisters tells us a lot. I know I have the Kardashians at the front, and They all come from the same mum, but as I'm told by the internet search, they don't all have the same dad. So perhaps they don't stand as a good example of the same description, but I think they do still. You can put in similar ingredients into any construction and theoretically follow the same design and come up with ships which have wildly different careers. You can put in different ingredients and come up with a ship which has a very similar career. In this case, we have two ships which have very similar careers. Rodney and Renown. They're both famous in their own time. They both go everywhere, do everything, have a list of scare stories that are beyond belief. Both of them seem to scare Scharnhorst and Gneisenau on a regular basis at some points and go out hunting them on an even more regular basis. It's actually finding the things which is so difficult. And yet both of them have sisters who get far less attention than they do. They all have the same potential on paper as their sisters, but they have very different careers. And the reality, to an extent, is geography, but also timing. Repulse gets the upgrades earlier, before Renown, which means Renown's in a better state, and Renown is then used for doing a lot of royal trips, which means, in a funny way, Renown is a better state for having the big upgrade and the major upgrade later. So she has it first. And then they realise Repulse is going to take longer. And what they're trying to get is as many through before 1942 as possible, because 1942 is when the 10-year rule will have been out. And you have to remember, the British government kept the 10-year rule in place until 1932. It only goes out formally in 1932, and informally it's still in place probably until 1937 in reality. Trying to persuade the Treasury, trying to persuade the British government to actually fund defence takes time, takes energy, takes effort. It's not easy. So that's the reality you're dealing with. Today, we have our own pair of ships, and they are the centerpieces of the fleet, once again. They are the most powerful assets the Royal Navy has, short of ballistic missile submarines, which are used as a deterrent. That's their daily use, and they're used for that 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 60 minutes an hour, 60 seconds a minute. The whole time they are on duty. There is one of them on duty at sea, deployed as a deterrent. Do we actually ever want to use the firepower they carry? No, but that's the entire point of them having that firepower. The deterrence is, in terms of nuclear deterrence, is saying there is a ceiling of which you will not cross. You will not invade British sovereign territory. You will not use nuclear weapons on us or our allies. If you do, we will respond. Now, people sit there and go, well, the British didn't use that when they invaded the Falkland Islands. And I know. So perhaps British overseas territories, we don't use nukes to defend. But if you invaded the UK and looked like you were going to take over London, I suspect that might be a very different matter. So notice those next most powerful weapons we have are these. They are as powerful as the air group we can fit upon them. So that depends on how many F-35s we have to put on them. But they're also as powerful as they are in combination with the task groups around them. Here's the problem. We only have two of them. Now, we could be smart, because, again, the Royal Navy only had Renown and Repulse, but they also had Hood and Tiger, so they had 4 battle cruisers. So they usually had 2 available. Yes, not all of them were created equal. There were 2 which were far better than the other 2, in my opinion. humble though it might be. But they had 4. We have a pool of 2. Remember what I said. 1 is a capability you have when it's available. It's saying we have the capability. It's not actually having the capability. 2 is usually you have the capability available. Usually. Unless an accident happens, in which case you're down to 1. 3 is having the capability always available. 4, you have the capability at sea, as well as a spare available, another one available. So you can have 2 when you need them. Surge capability. 5 is a guaranteed 2 available. Quite often 3. A surge capacity of 3. So again, if I was the Royal Navy, I would say 3 LHDs with ski ramps would be the best way to go. To guarantee organic aviation power of what they seem to have decided they need for their fleet. And remember, it's you building a fleet, not a ship, when you're designing a ship. You're building a component of your fleet. That's what the Queen Elizabeth class are. They are a cornerstone of the Royal Navy's fleet. But you usually have at least 4 corners. Not 2 on a building. Can get away with 3, but you usually have at least 4. 5 is really good. 6 is gorgeous. And 8, well, that's just pretty. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and take care. Hope you're having a good Saturday, and hope the storm has been treating you nicely. Me, it's just been blowing over my head the whole time.